When the doctor told him his blood couldn't save the boy, time stopped. He froze because the only child he'd ever loved was never his. Kneeling on the cold hospital floor, he wasn't mourning a dying son, but a dying faith. In that moment of desperate prayer, God answered with a knife to his heart. That child is not your own. The small, forgotten town of Havenwood lay wrapped in the unforgiving cold of a relentless winter. The air was heavy with the promise of more snow and the tangible despair that clung to the town's poorest corners. In a dilapidated house on the outskirts, where the wind whistled through loose window panes, lived Thomas, a man in his early 40s, his hands calloused from years of wrenching pipes as a municipal plumber. He lived with his wife, Maria, and their son, 8-year-old Eli. Thomas's poverty was crushing, a heavy cloak he couldn't shake off, yet his faith was his armor. Every single night, after putting Eli to sleep and before collapsing into his own weary rest, Thomas would kneel before a small, tarnished wooden cross hung crookedly on the wall. The only light was the weak, flickering glow of a paraffin lamp, casting long, distorted shadows around the room. His prayers were not whispers. They were low, fervent supplications, pleas for deliverance. Lord, he would murmur, his voice rough with emotion, grant my family a life less burdensome. Show us your light in this darkness. He believed absolutely and without question in the power of the divine. He often taught his son, faith isn't a shelter from the storm, son. It's the strength to stand firm while the wind howls. But despite his unwavering devotion, their life remained mired in debt. His job was perpetually unstable, and Maria, his beautiful, weary wife, was growing colder, her exhaustion breeding a deep, festering discontent. One evening, as the snow began to fall in heavy drifts outside, Thomas knelt, Eli already asleep in his arms, his small body a fragile comfort. He held the child tight, feeling the soft weight of his future against his chest, praying for a miracle he desperately needed to materialize. The lamp flickered, a symbol of hope barely burning, yet foretelling a deeper tragedy that lay ahead. The first blow arrived not with a thunderclap, but with a curt, formal envelope. After 15 years of loyal service, Thomas was laid off. The company was downsizing, merging. His years of dedicated labor meant nothing in the face of cost-cutting. He went immediately to St. Jude's Church, his refuge, seeking counsel from Father Michael. The old priest, kind but detached from Thomas's daily struggle, patted his shoulder. "Be patient, my son," Father Michael advised gently. "Continue to trust in God's plan. He works in mysterious ways." Thomas took the advice to heart. He didn't wallow. He worked. He took on any job he could find, shoveling snow, hauling boxes, scraping by on odd jobs. But the income was a pittance, barely covering the interest on their mountain debts. Maria watched her husband's quiet, desperate struggle, and a profound weariness settled over her spirit. She was tired of faith that produced no bread, tired of miracles that never came. The warmth between them evaporated, replaced by silences that screamed of unmet needs and broken promises. One gray morning, Thomas returned from a fruitless day of searching for work. The house was too quiet. On the cold kitchen table, next to the empty coffee mugs, lay a single, neatly folded letter. His heart sank before he even touched the page. "Thomas, I can't do this anymore. I am exhausted by the cold and the hunger and the endless waiting for a prayer to be answered. I have met someone who offers certainty, not hope. I need a real life, Thomas, not just empty prayers and promises that never keep. Forgive me, but I have to choose survival. Maria. The world dissolved into a ringing, terrifying silence. Maria had left him for a wealthier man. She hadn't just left him, she had demolished his last pillar of emotional support. Eli, confused and terrified, ran to his father, burying his face in Thomas's worn trousers and weeping uncontrollably. That night, Thomas stood before the cross, the fragile symbol of his life's guiding principle. He was not praying, he was demanding answers. His voice began as a choke, rising into a heart-wrenching roar. You tell me to have faith. I dedicated my life, my soul, my heart to your plan. Where's your plan now? My God, why have you abandoned me? What kind of test is this when the faithful are starved and the wicked feast? The shadows in the room seemed to press in on him, mocking his anguish. With a guttural cry, he ripped the cross from the wall. The dry, brittle wood cracked against the hearth, splintering into pieces. A brutal, physical manifestation of the crushing destruction of his absolute faith. The man who lived by prayer was now living in the ruins of his own conviction. The weeks that followed were a blur of cold, cheap whiskey and a quick, hot temper. Thomas still worked the terrible odd jobs, but his gentleness was gone. He was short-tempered, distant, a wounded bear trying desperately to shield his cub. Eli, despite his young age, carried the burden of his father's darkness, his small face etched with sadness. The winter deepened, reaching its cruelest peak. One night, the cold in the house felt like shards of glass. Eli began to shiver violently. By midnight, his forehead was burning, and he was unconscious. In a panic that sliced through his drunken haze, Thomas wrapped Eli in a blanket and ran through the heavy snow to the community clinic. He thrust his son into the hands of the night doctor, a young woman named Dr. Lena. Please, Thomas begged, falling to his knees, his breath catching in ragged sobs. Save him. Please, God, don't take the only thing I have left. The next hour was an eternity. Thomas paced the sterile hall, praying instinctively, only to catch himself and curse the empty habit. Finally, Dr. Lena emerged, her expression grave. Mr. Thomas, your son has a severe infection. We need to stabilize him, but he needs an immediate blood transfusion. His blood type is B negative, which we don't stock much of. She paused, her eyes softening with professional pity. We need a donor urgently. Since you're his father, we must test your compatibility immediately. Thomas agreed instantly. This was a chance to save his boy, to prove his commitment. He watched the nurse take the blood sample, feeling a surge of primal, protective love. A long 20 minutes later, Dr. Lena called him back into her office. She looked troubled. She sat down, gesturing for him to do the same. Mr. Thomas, she began slowly, her voice low, I'm sorry. We ran the tests multiple times. Your blood is not compatible with Eli's. Thomas frowned, confused. But my blood is O positive. We knew that. Eli must be O positive or B positive, surely. Dr. Lena sighed heavily and delivered the final life-shattering verdict. No, and that's not all. In the course of standard protocol, we had to run more detailed genetic tests for other potential issues. Mr. Thomas, the results show that Eli, he is not your biological son. Thomas felt the air evacuate his lungs. He didn't faint. He didn't scream. He simply froze, a statue of absolute agonizing betrayal. Memory after memory flashed. Maria's strange anxiety when he asked about Eli's birth certificate, her refusal to ever talk about their son's early years, the distant look in her eyes. All the nights he had knelt and prayed for their son, all the sacrifices he made, all the love he poured out. It was all built on a foundation of lies. The betrayal was total. Betrayed by his wife, betrayed by life, and now, finally, the silent, terrible betrayal of the faith he had clung to so fiercely. He stood up slowly, his movements wooden, and looked up at the ceiling, his eyes seeing neither the plaster nor the lights, but the empty space where his God should have been. He let out a wail that was more animal than human, a sound of absolute cosmic despair. What did you give me, God? What gift did you bestow upon me? A life of poverty, a wife who left, and a son who isn't even mine? This was the emotional peak, the moment Thomas's soul fractured completely. A miracle of sorts did happen. An anonymous donation of B-negative blood was rushed over from the regional hospital's blood bank, and Eli was saved. But when Eli recovered, Thomas was a hollow man. He provided for the boy, but the warmth was gone. He was remote, cold, sometimes even snapping at Eli over spilled milk or a broken toy. He couldn't bear to look at the child, the living proof of Maria's ultimate deceit. One night, as Thomas sat drinking, Eli approached him cautiously. The boy looked pale but healthy. "Dad," Eli whispered, clutching a worn-out teddy bear, "I just want you to smile like you used to. That's all I need." Thomas felt a sharp, agonizing stab of guilt and love, but he instantly crushed it. He forced a mask of indifference. "Go to sleep, Eli," he said, his voice flat. "I have work to do." 2 years later, Thomas's reckless self-destruction took its inevitable toll. His drinking had become relentless. One day, while trying to fix a leak in a freezing basement, he collapsed, the cold and the sickness finally overwhelming him. He woke up in the hospital, the same one where Eli had been saved. Dr. Lena was standing over him, her face grim. "Mr. Thomas, the years of alcohol abuse have caught up to you. You have end-stage cirrhosis. Without a partial liver transplant, you won't last long." A new kind of despair settled over him. He called the few relatives he had left, the old friends, the neighbors he used to help. Everyone politely refused. He was a burden, a man cursed by bad luck and a bad attitude. He was truly alone. Lying in the stark white room, staring at his reflection in the window, he was utterly resigned. "God has truly forsaken me now," he whispered, a tear finally tracking a path down his unshaven cheek. The next day, a small figure appeared in his room. Eli, now 10, stood tall and serious. "Don't worry, Dad," Eli said, his voice firm. "I found a way to help." Thomas frowned. "What are you talking about, son? Go home." Eli didn't listen. The doctor soon entered, holding a clipboard, her eyes shining with something that looked like admiration and reluctance. "Mr. Thomas," Dr. Lena said, "2 days ago your son Eli came in on his own. He was quiet, but incredibly determined. He insisted on being tested for liver compatibility." She paused, placing the clipboard down. "The test results are a perfect match, a rare, impossible match." Thomas was stunned. "No, absolutely not. He's a child. It's too dangerous." "We told him all the risks," Dr. Lena confirmed, her voice thick, but he was resolute. Eli stepped forward, his small hand reaching out and grasping his father's skeletal wrist. "I heard you talking to the nurse, Dad. You said no one would help. But I can help." He looked Dr. Lena straight in the eye and spoke the most profound words Thomas had ever heard. "He raised me. He gave me a life. I owe him this life back." Thomas realized then that the child he had rejected, the boy whose paternity had broken him, was the one person willing to sacrifice everything for him. The decision was heartbreaking, but Thomas knew he would die without it. He reluctantly consented. The surgery was long, tense, and agonizing. When Thomas finally woke up, the first thing he saw was a small, pale figure in the recovery bed next to his. Eli, thin and weak, but awake. Eli turned his head, his face splitting into a tired, beautiful smile. "You'll be all right, Dad. I have faith in that." Thomas's carefully constructed wall of bitterness and self-pity exploded. Tears poured from his eyes, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming, shattering love. He reached out and grasped Eli's hand, the small, tender palm next to his massive, scarred one. "My son," he choked out, every word weighted with 2 years of agonizing regret. "I am so sorry. I was blind and cruel. The paternity test, it meant nothing. You are the gift, Eli. You were the blessing God sent me when I was too blind and selfish to see it." The child sacrifice had not only healed his body, but had redeemed his soul. Many months later, after a long, arduous recovery, Thomas and Eli stood together, bundled against the crisp air, and walked back to St. Jude's Church. The building was quiet, serene. Thomas knelt at the altar, not before a crude cross, but before the massive, polished sanctuary cross bathed in the morning light. He didn't ask for wealth, he didn't ask for a better job, and he didn't beg for deliverance. He only offered thanks. He finally understood. Faith was not about receiving a magical intervention. It was about the providence of God woven into the fabric of human suffering and love. It was seeing the divine hand in the selfless act of a child, the perfect compatibility of a liver that defied genetic ties, and the strength to rebuild when everything had been broken. He spoke to Father Michael, who watched him with knowing eyes. "I once shattered the cross in my house, Father. I thought God was silent, but I realized now He was teaching me how to truly love and how to truly see. He didn't answer my prayers for money, but He answered my prayer for a life less burdensome by showing me the true value of life itself through my Son." As Thomas and Eli walked out of the church, the sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting vibrant, warm colors onto the ground before them, reds of sacrifice, blues of sorrow, and gold of glory. The light enveloped them like a blessing, 2 figures walking into a future built not on easy promises, but on the profound, tested, and redeemed love of a Father and the Son God had intended for him all along.